Good day everyone, I am Daniel Foreñas de la Cruz from the Bachelor of Arts in English Language Studies. So our course or subject for today is the TLS 113 or the Theories of Language Acquisition. So I am going to introduce the topic for today. So our topic for today is the second language learning. So what is second language learning? Second language learning is pag-aaral natin ng ating second language. So ano nga ba yung second language natin? Our second language is the language that we have learned or we are learning aside from our first language. Ang first language natin is yun yung mga na-acquire natin or yung na-acquire nating language nung tayo ay bata pa. For example, a Filipino person or a girl is a Filipino citizen in which her parents are also Filipinos. But, pagdating ng kanyang high school, she actually learns her second language, English language. That is her second language, the English language. So to make it easy and simple, ang ating first language is yun yung language na ating natutunan noong tayo ay bata without the instruction or formal education. While our second language needs teachers, educators, and anyone who knew the language and to be teach to us or to some people. Pero ang ating second language is not literally the second language we learned. For example, or for instance, me, I am a Filipino citizen and my first language is Filipino because my parents converse their conversations using the Filipino language and I adapt it. So, I was high school na, I have learned English, which means that my second language is English. But today or now when I'm in college na, we are learning about the language of Japanese and Mandarins, for example, and Spanish. So these three are my languages nung college na ako, which means pang ilang language ko na siya. If we have my first language as a Filipino and my second language is English, so I have three more languages if natutunan ko silang tatlo, Japanese, Mandarin, and Spanish. So, considered ba na yung third language ko na natutunan ko, which is Japanese, ay my third language or the L3? No. Why? Because ang ating second language, hindi siya literally the second language na na-learn mo. But, it is the languages that you may learn after your first language. So, itong apat na to, English, Japanese, Mandarin, and Spanish, are all my second languages. So, meaning, first language and my second languages. Ano pa yung dapat nating malaman dito? Kasi may mga tao na ang akala ang L2 or ang ating second language ay ang ating bilingualis or we can consider ourselves as bilingual individuals. But that is a myth. It is not true. Why? Because a bilingual person or a bilingual individual is not the same as a person na nakapag-acquire ng kanyang second language. Kasi ang ating second language is na-acquire natin after ng ating first language. While bilingualism ay dalawa. So meaning, you have learned your first language or your first languages simultaneously. Sabay mo silang natutunan, kaya meron kang bilingualism. At ikaw ay mayroong dalawang languages from the very first start of your childhood. So, anong pinagkaiba nila? Second language is natutunan mo after your first language. While if bilingualism naman, ito ay natutunan mo ng sabay. Sabay mong natutunan ang mga lingwahe na alam mo.
Context for language learning. Let's think about different learners. Imagine a child in daycare hearing English every day. Now, imagine a teenager learning Spanish in a classroom. And finally, think of an adult immigrant who has to learn the local language to survive. Their experiences are completely different, right? Children are usually less self-conscious. They just talk, even if they make mistakes. Adults, on the other hand, know more about language rules but often feel shy or anxious. Another factor is exposure. Children in informal setting hear the second language for many hours a day, while classroom learners may only hear it few times a week. Today, we'll dive the three influential perspectives that shape our understanding of how language are acquired. Let's have Casey to discuss what is behaviorism.
Behaviorism is one of the earliest theory of language learning, and it explains that people learn a new language through habit formation. According to this view, learning happens when learners imitate words or sentences, practice them repeatedly, and receive reinforcement, such as praise or correction. For example, a child says, "Mama," and the parents respond actively and positively. The child is encouraged to do it again and repeat it again until it becomes a natural. For the teaching method, this theory is led to the audiolingual method, wherein the students memorize dialogues, do drills, and repeat patterns over and over until it becomes automatic. Connected to the behaviorism is the contrastive analysis hypothesis, which predicts the errors occurs when the first language is different from the second language of the learners. For example, a Filipino might say, "Open the light" in English because in Filipino we say "buksan ang ilaw." However, behaviorism has a weakness that not all the errors is explained by the first language of the learners. Because of these weaknesses, another perspective emerged called the Innatist perspective. Chomsky introduced the idea of universal grammar, which suggests that all language has shared common structures foundations and that children are born with this universal framework in their brains. This means that humans have an inborn ability to acquire language naturally, not just by the habit or memorization. For example, a baby born in the Philippines but raised in France will grow up speaking French fluently even without formal teaching. It is because their mind is already prepared to acquire any kind of language they are exposed to.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carmina Agas. I'm going to discuss about cognitivist developmental theories such as information processing and competition model. In information processing, language becomes automatic with practice, less focus on forms, more on its meaning. When we first learn language, we focus more on its form, the grammar, sentence structure, and spelling. But with practice and repeated use, the processing becomes automatic. You no longer unconsciously think of the rule. Instead, we focus now more on the meaning of what we are saying or reading. In connectionism, learners build knowledge through repeated exposure on form patterns. For example, he runs, they run. Over time, the learners unconsciously recognize the pattern, the singular and the plural. And on the competition model, learners rely more on cues to understand the meaning. Different language use different cues to signal who is doing what, to whom. And it has two factors, the English and the other language. In English, which contains the um, subject, verb, and object. Um, the example would be the the dog chased the cat. I'm sure you already know what is the subject. The subject would be the dog, and the verb is the chase, and the object is the cat. Of course, if we reverse it, the meaning could be different now. Yeah. And on the other language, learners rely on case matters, um, case markers, particles, and on animacy to figure out the meaning. Um, Learners compete between possible interpretation, and the strongest cues help them figure out the meaning. The example would be the the ball kick boy. I'm sure you already know who kick. Of course, the boy. Even if it's in a unusual form, it still has the meaning. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Karilan Tamani. Interaction theories. Interactionists argue that we learn language not just by rules but through interaction. Talking, noticing, and adjusting speech. Interaction hypothesis. Comprehension happens when people adjust their speech. For example, when you're reporting or explaining something, you make it simpler so the listener understands. Noticing hypothesis. You can't learn a grammar unless you actually notice it. For example, when you hear mistake corrected or see new structure, you learn. Output hypothesis. When you try to speak or write, you realize that you don't know, and this pushes you to improve. For example, practicing reporting show you gaps in your knowledge. Processability theory. We learn grammar in a fixed order, like how kids first learn simple sentence before mastering complex one. Example: a child first says I eat before I'm eating. Interactive moment. Turn to your seatmate. And they corrected you. Congratulations. You just experienced the output hypothesis.
Hi everyone, I'm Donalyn Mapalo and today I will be discussing the cognitivist and developmental theories. Cognitivist and developmental theories focuses on how people learn by understanding, thinking, and developing over time. Cognitivist theories see learners as active thinkers who process and organize information, not just memorizing facts. Developmental theories like those of Piaget and Vygotsky explains that learning depends on stages of growth and social interaction. Together, this theory shows that learning is shaped by both mind's thinking processes and the learner's developmental stage. Let's move on to informational processing. Learning a language is like training the brain to handle information efficiently. At first, learners focus on a lot a form, like grammar, rules, and structures, but with practice, the process becomes automatic so they can focus more on meaning. And that is what they want to say. Like, for example, a beginner might think, uh, a beginner might think carefully. She goes to school. And with practice, she goes to school comes out automatically, and the learner can focus on the message instead of the grammar rule. Let's move on to connectionism. Learner acquire language by noticing and practicing patterns through repeated exposure. The brain builds connections between words and grammar forms, making them natural over time. Like, for example, hearing and using he runs and they run repeatedly helps learners see the pattern. Like, for example, he or she it add s and that runs. For others, just the base verb run. Eventually, they don't have to think about the rule. It becomes automatic. Information means Information processing means language practice makes speaking automatic. And connectionism, repeated exposure builds patterns in the brain. Uh, and let's move on to the next, which is the competition model. The competition model explains that learners use different cues in the sentence to figure out its meaning. These cues can be word order or grammar markers, like verb endings, case markers, or animacy, whether the subject is alive or not. Different languages rely on different cues. In English word order is the strongest cue. SVO means, and that means is subject, verb, and object. In other language, learner may depend more on grammar, markers, or intimacy. Like, for example, in English, word order cue. A dog chased the cat. Word order tells a dog as subject and cat is object. If we change it, the cat changed the dog, and the meaning changes. And the meaning changes completely, even with the same words. Like, for example, in another language, grammar marker cue. In some language like Japanese, word endings are particles, not word order. Tell us who is doing the action. Like, inuga neko oikaketa means the dog chased the cat, and neko go anon oikaketa, the cat chased the dog. Here's the markers: ga as subject and o the object. Matter more than word order. Competition models shows that learners pay attention to different cues depending on the language they are learning. That's all. Thank you.